Well, hey everybody, it's Sandy and welcome back to my channel dedicated to helping you advocate for your own health one topic at a time. So guys, I'm thinking today is kind of like a part two, right? I recently did a video talking about whether I got the new bivalent COVID booster. Spoiler alert, I did not yet. At some point I'll get boosted. It'll have to be the bivalent. That's what's out there. Not time yet for me, and I explained why in that video, but that doesn't mean I don't use COVID mitigation, as you all know. So I thought I would talk about it. I actually just have a more nuanced, several prong approach to COVID mitigation these days, largely because I think the place that the vaccines have served, at least up until now, and the jury is out on the Omicron boost. I'm hoping that we find out that it prevents this infection and the spread of infection. But until we find that out, at least going on what we have already in terms of empirical data, the role of the vaccines is to prevent severe acute phase of the disease and death. First of all, I wasn't all that worried about that anyway, but more importantly, I've got that protection already on board. I think that's a low bar, and in my opinion, we're focusing on the tip of the iceberg and missing everything under the waterline. That is all kinds of other problems that COVID causes that has nothing to do with the severity of the disease, the acute illness, or, really how old you are, any other kinds of risk factors. Let me just tell you the genesis of this. I heard a video interview, a podcast not too long ago about, it was interviewing the author of an article that came out. And I believe he's a neurologist, and he did a long study through a VA system, which usually affords a huge population sample, and compared many thousands of patients who had COVID over the last year with many millions of patients in the database who did not, and found that for up to a year, and this doesn't stop at a year. I think a year is when he just stopped collecting the data and started writing about it. But for up to that point that he stopped for a year, after having had COVID, people had increased risk of 44 different neurologic diseases. Okay, and I'm not just talking about brain fog, all kinds of neurologic disease that could have to do with inflammation, could have to do with something that you're already sort of predestined to get, like maybe you're going to get Alzheimer's when you're 75, but you get COVID when you're 60, and that comes on sooner. There were all different categories that this broke down into, and it's beyond the scope of this video to talk about that. And by the way, there are any number of studies that are showing all the problems in terms of long COVID, all the sequelae and all the things we really don't know, that we're just starting to study and we don't know how to address. That's the part that bothers me. I've had some people contact me and say, it looks like maybe the people in the Facebook group discussion of Sandy's DIY Health Advocacy Facebook group are a little bit, too crazy about this or whatever. I don't agree. I think it'd be one thing if this wasn't empirically true, but I think ignoring something that's empirically true is just, it's ignorant. And I think the time is going to come where we're not going to be able to push this discussion away any further, but we're going to have it. There will be enough data out there that there will be no ignoring it anymore. So that's sort of the genesis of this for me. I thought, I've really got a several pronged approach to mitigation now, because the vaccine has its place, but it's not addressing this issue that I've just talked about. And I am very concerned about this issue. And by the way, in that particular study in the VA that showed that there was an increased risk of up to 44 different neurologic conditions just as a result of having had COVID in the last year, it was regardless of vaccine status. It was regardless of the severity of the case. You could have a very mild case. You could be young and say, oh, I'm young and healthy, and it's like a cold. Believe it or not, I actually had somebody at a social setting come up to me, an outdoor social thing I was invited to, and it was very nice, but somebody had come up to me and said something like, so, have you had COVID yet? Because it's really not that bad. God, it just really misses the point, guys. So the podcast I listened to that interviewed the author of this study was really interesting because he said something that I wish everybody could hear. He said that what we really have to do now, he said, while the vaccines are still the cornerstone of our public health response to this pandemic and people should be vaccinated, we really have to convince people to try not to get COVID. That's not the place for the current vaccines. So he said, even those of you who have kids, I have 2 adult kids. One is more careful than the other. They've both had COVID. It's very, very important to try to convince your loved ones, your kids, especially the young ones. They feel invincible, right? Young adults, and they're sick of it and everything else. But I think it's very important for us all not to get this. Okay, and it is important to be able to live your life. I'm not saying we should all be locked down and live like hermits, and I really can't stand when I'm countered with that kind of an answer, because I'm not saying that. But I do think it's just important to be smart and use some basic mitigation. So the cornerstone of my mitigation is the N95. I've told people before, like sometimes people message me and ask me about a particular fabric mask or whatever. I'm really only recommending N95s at this point. I know some people like the KF94 and the KN95. That's fine. I don't recommend them. By definition, they can allow up to something like 11% leak. Anything that doesn't have a head strap is only pulling backwards, not upwards, whatever, beyond the scope of the video as well. But the N95 is the cornerstone of my mitigation. Now, that's why I wonder if I'm ever not going to have my hair up. Like, only when I wear the Ready mask, the adhesive N95, I put my hair down. I kind of enjoy it. So the N95 is king. I have lots of different videos on N95s. I have a whole playlist on all the different N95s that I have reviewed for you guys. There are lots of differences between them. Some are more suitable for people who get too hot. Some of them are more suitable for people who have larger faces. Some of them are nice and thin and lightweight, but that means the trade-off is you can't take it off and put it back on too many times. It'll lose its shape and it won't be able to reseal. Another one might be really good for repeated taking off and putting back on, but the trade-off is that it's kind of sturdier and it's hot. So please, nobody message me asking me which N95 to get, because the whole point of those videos and those reviews is to try to explain to you like the nuances of that particular one that I'm reviewing, so that you can figure out what's best for you. So N95 is king, and I'm going to be wearing those for the foreseeable future. Now, that doesn't mean I can always wear an N95, and sometimes I guess an N95 can be on wrong, or it can leak and you don't know it. So there's a few different things. Basic social distancing, yes. I try not to be in indoor crowded places, although that is something where I'm trying to also get myself a little more used to, just knowing that I really am safe with an N95 on. So there's some fine line there, right? If something is really packed and crowded, I don't want to be a part of it. But if there's just something that's indoors where there are people and they're not wearing masks and I'm wearing an N95, depending on the amount of space and whatever, I probably am quite safe. So I'm judicious about it, but I'm trying to use those opportunities where I do think it's safe to just go ahead and do it and get used to it, and sort of just get myself used to feeling safe in that kind of a situation, because it is. So I'm trying to separate what's the empirical from what's really the emotional. A couple other things there is, I normally don't use mouthwashes because they usually have alcohol in them. The only thing I do typically use is a xylitol mouthwash I've talked about on this channel, because xylitol breaks down some biofilm, or so they say. But this particular mouthwash has an ingredient called acetylpyridium chloride. I'm going to see if the camera will focus on it. It probably will. Oh, I think it's probably backwards anyway, right? Because I'm on my phone. I'm not on my computer. But the Crest Intense Germ Kill, it just most mouthwashes that I looked at did not have this ingredient, but acetylpyridium chloride, 0.05%. This does kill COVID. It was studied. Now, I'm not walking around like with this stuff in my mouth all the time, but this might be something to have if, let's say, you work in an office environment and you're wearing a mask, but then you take off your mask to eat or something, and afterwards you might want to rinse with this. You've been to the dentist, whatever. You come home at the end of the day, maybe a good thing to rinse with. It just, right? I don't think it's going to hurt. Another thing I put up on the Facebook group, there was a topic I put up there that I didn't want to bring onto video because I was a little bit concerned about the bots. Okay, don't even get me started. I don't believe in censorship, and I did a video a while back where I interviewed a doctor. This is long before we had vaccines, and he was prescribing the medication that started with an I that became this big political debacle. And I'm just in favor of open, honest discussion and debate. And wherever something goes, I'm okay with that. I let the facts take me there. But whatever, I was threatened that my whole video would be taken down, and my whole channel actually would be shut down. And you'd think that I was recommending that people not get vaccinated and whatever. So I did find out. Let me back up. I was reading about a product, an Israeli product, that has been tested and is now approved in Israel, in the UK, in India, in several Asian countries, and is not been approved here in this country, and therefore not in Canada either. I think Canada uses our FDA. It is a nasal spray, and it is NO is the chemical formula. Capital N, capital O. So capital N stands for nitric. If you ever seen N2O, that's nitrous oxide. That's an anesthetic. So NO is the other word oxide after it. And it's a profound antimicrobial, antiviral, anti-infective. And in the small studies that have been done so far, I found that it was very persuasive. Now, there are larger studies ongoing. I believe there's a phase 3 clinical trial going on in France that's still enrolling. But basically, what they found in the earlier trials is that it's not only a preventive, but it's also a therapeutic, that people who have COVID, who were given the option to use it, had the viral load decreased by 98% in like a day, by 99% in 72 hours. People tend to test negative when using this particular spray. In terms of prevented, it was studied on university students who had high-risk exposure, which was defined as having a roommate who came down with COVID and being in close contact, like within a couple of meters with no mask for at least so many minutes or whatever. And then you were given the choice whether you wanted to take this spray or not. And people who didn't had a 26% chance of getting COVID. The infection rate among that group was 26. The people who used it, the infection rate was 6%. So I thought that was very persuasive as well. Again, not double-blind, placebo-controlled, not large, getting there. And let me just say, I got some people really grateful when I put it up in the Facebook group, and other people criticized it. That's fine. I can take it. And I think there are legitimate criticisms about doing things that are not, FDA approved yet or whatever. In my research, I feel very strongly that even if this isn't completely benign, which I kind of think it is, I think the particular substance is pretty benign. But my calculus is not whether it's benign. My calculus is how it compares to COVID. Am I willing to take some risks with this? Is it going to have some side effects? I don't know. So far, I haven't had any. I've been using it. My family is using it. I think the real good place for nasal sprays, like the one I'm talking about, is actually in the group that I mentioned a moment ago, younger people, like young adults who maybe are in social settings where it's just too much of a social cost to wear a mask and they can't do it. Maybe this will be helpful for that. It's certainly better than nothing. And it's certainly better than COVID. I just have to believe that. But, the really exciting thing about it is that I had read an article where the developers of this product, it's an Israeli product, by the way, they were interviewed and said that this is really the first focus on viral load. It's going to be very, very important to focus on viral load. I think that if we want to stop, my common sense tells me that if we want to get out in front of something like long COVID, we've got to stop replication more efficiently, even more efficiently than Paxlovid. Doesn't seem like, in some ways it's wonderful. In other ways, it's kind of been a disappointment. And it kind of does more of the same, right? It's designed to keep people out of the hospital and keep people from going on to a severe acute phase of the illness. I mean, we've already crossed that bridge. We need other things. So I'm not going to again say the product, but if you head over to the Facebook group, if you don't already belong to the Facebook group, head on over to the Facebook page, Sandy's DIY Health Advocacy. You can ask to join the group and you can partake in the discussion and see it. People have private messaged me there if they're interested in purchasing. There are legitimate pharmacies in Israel. And by the way, I'm actually looking at a bottle of this stuff right now and I'll show it to you. But on here, there is what would I think would be their equivalent of an FDA approval. It says Israel Ministry of Health registration number. I would not go buy this stuff like on eBay or something, which you can, but rather from a legitimate pharmacy. I don't know how long that's going to be an option, but anyway, this is what it looks like. So I guess that's in Hebrew. Yeah. So that is part of my mitigation strategy. It's kind of one of my newer finds. And by the way, I'm never recommending people do anything. I'm just, telling people what I'm doing. I'm trying to help you evaluate N95s or evaluate products and things like that. And I'll give you my thoughts on them. Certainly have a discussion with your own practitioner. Certainly I'm not telling you what you should do, but this is something that I'm doing. And so I want to share it with you guys. So if it's helpful, that's great. And if you don't agree, that's fine. You don't agree. But if anybody has used this stuff, I have seen some anecdotal things written down, like in the comments section or in the feedback section and reviews on the product. And they seem either benign or wonderful. I haven't seen anything bad other than that some people don't like that this kind of burns when it first goes in. It says that on the packaging. The dose is 2 sprays twice a day. I will tell you, though, that in the clinical trials where they were looking at a high-risk exposure, they were using it as a therapeutic, so it wasn't just basic prevention. It was really more of a therapeutic or post-exposure prophylaxis. they use the 2 sprays in each nostril 6 times a day, so it was every 4 hours. So if, if I get, hopefully I don't ever have that situation, but if I get to that situation, that's what I'll do. I don't use it all the time. I don't use it every day, so if there turns out to be some issues with it, I'm just not indiscriminately using it. It's also kind of expensive. But if I'm in a particularly high-risk setting, yeah, I will put that on before I don my N95 and go in somewhere, and I feel more comfortable that way, and I certainly feel more comfortable having my loved ones who are, maybe in some riskier situations than me using it, and that's what we're doing. So, yeah, anyway, let me know if this was helpful, and until next time, be well. Bye-bye.